So we've been focusing on biodiversity, and I'd like to cover briefly how we as humans are affecting biodiversity. There's an acronym associated with it titled HIPPCO, H-I-P-P-C-O. The H stands for habitat loss, including fragmentation, conversion, and destruction. And on the right-hand side, we have aerial photos of habitat fragmentation in northern Alberta in Canada. This is the area in 1949, and you can see by 1964 we have more roads stretching across the region. In 1982 we have less tree cover with more open space due to housing developments. And in 1981 it's a patchwork of trees, just small areas of trees amongst a lot of urbanized areas. Comparing 1991 to 1949, you can see a distinct difference in a 40-year period from one picture to the next. And the result of that is habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, and the species that relied on this habitat no longer have that widespread habitat available to them. The next way is through invasive species, and I'll talk more about invasive species in the next several slides. Pollution as well can impact biodiversity. Population growth, and this is an indication of population growth in a specific region. Climate change. Overconsumption of resources as well. Okay, this slide is depicting the Endangered Species Act, which was passed in 1973. And that law was set forth in order to protect plants and animals. So let's go into some definitions here. A threatened species is one that is still considered abundant in its natural range, but is declining and could potentially be extinct with time. Extinction can be broken into 3 different levels of species extinction, including local extinction, when a species is no longer found in a particular area that it once inhabited, but it's found elsewhere in the world. Ecological extinction is when so few members of a species are left that it can no longer play its ecological role in the biological communities for which it's found in. And then biological extinction refers to the species no longer being found on Earth. It's gone forever. As mentioned earlier, causes of extinction are habitat loss, introduced and non-native species, which I'm going to cover in more detail, pollution, overconsumption of resources. And let me jump back in regards to non-native invasive species. In 1930s, we had the introduction of the fire ant by accident in Alabama. The fire ant had no natural predators, and it spread rapidly by land and water throughout the South, from Texas to Florida, and as far north as Tennessee and Virginia. Wherever the fire ant has gone, up to 90% of the native ant population has been sharply reduced or wiped out. The fire ant reduces the access of other ant species to resources, and it beats them in combat by having 10 times more colonies per area than native ant species. So that's an example of a non-native species outcompeting and taking over territory of a native species. In addition, let's talk about overconsumption of resources. This is considered to be the second largest threat to animal species. The whaling industry is a good example of this. Blue whales used to number over 150,000 whales. Now about 450 blue whales actually remain. And then the passenger pigeon, it once inhabited the eastern United States in flocks so large that it could darken the sky. About 1 billion birds, and they were killed. In 1914, the last bird held in captivity in the Cincinnati Zoo died. So, I mentioned passenger pigeon as being extinct, and there's some other species listed here like the blue pike and the Carolina parakeet as being extinct. We've got some species that are improving, like the whooping crane, the black-footed ferret, the West Indian manatee, the California condor, the Indiana bat. I want to circle polar bear here and let you know that the population numbers here are still under research and documentation as a result of climate change that's occurring and the melting of the sea ice in the region where the polar bear lives. So Not certain that this is considered to be an improving population because there's concern about climate change impact on this specific species. And then species that are considered recovered include the bald eagle, the grizzly bear, I already mentioned the American alligator, and the Delmarva fox squirrel. So on the map to the left of your screen is depicting endangered species in counties throughout the United States. If it's in red, it means that there's more than 10 endangered species that live in that particular area. Notice Florida has quite a bit of red. Okay, Hawaii is considered similar, and it's shaded completely red because there's more than 10 species that are considered threatened or endangered by the federal government that live in the Hawaiian Islands. Look at the California coast area as well. So more than 10 species in this region. And please remember, it's not just mammals that are included on these lists. You have amphibians, you have fish, you have insects, and you have plants as well. On the right of your screen lists the characteristics for species that are at risk for becoming a threatened or endangered species. The first one is a low reproductive rate, and that makes sense. If they don't reproduce annually or more frequently, then they're likely to have stress with population reductions due to habitat fragmentation or invasive species, pollution, overconsumption of resources. Examples of species that have low reproductive rates are the blue whale, the giant panda, and the rhinoceros. Maybe it has a specialized niche where it has to live in a very particular habitat, like the panda or the koala. Maybe it has a narrow distribution in terms of where its historical range is located, like the elephant, seal, and the desert pupfish. And I think I mentioned to you the sea otter off the coast of California. That's one that's considered to have a narrow distribution. Maybe it feeds at a high trophic level, such as the Bengal tiger or the bald eagle or the grizzly bear. As a result, it can be impacted by things going on in the food chain beneath its trophic level. There are some species that have fixed migratory patterns, which have been impacted by us as humans, including the sea turtle, the blue whale, and the whooping crane. Some species are simply just considered rare, like different types of orchids and the African violet. And then you have other species that are valuable from a commercial standpoint, where you can get a lot of money if you hunt them and then sell them for use. So the snow leopard, the tiger, the elephant, the rhinoceros fall into this category. And I'll talk more about the black market trade of animals later on in this lecture series. And those species that have large territories, like the grizzly bear, the California condor, and the mountain lion, also would be at risk for becoming threatened or endangered because they demand such a large area to live off of. So I want to define the term endemic species. Endemic species are considered to be very vulnerable to extinction. They are geographically constrained to one particular place on planet. They often live on islands, and humanity has pushed more than a handful of continent-based animals to an endemic state through hunting and habitat loss. Endemic species are more likely to form in biologically isolated areas, and they have a higher risk of extinction because of their geographic location and that they are very specific niches that they live in. So it does make it difficult for them to migrate or adapt during rapid changing environmental conditions. The most endangered endemic species are actually amphibians. I mentioned geographic constraints such as being an island with species living on it. I want to give you the example of St. Helena, New Caledonia, and the Hawaiian chain. St. Helena is a volcano island near the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it only has 60 native plant species. But interestingly enough, 50 of these exist nowhere else. So it's because this island is located so far distant from any other land that this island has 50 endemic species of plants. This is a picture of the Formosan rock macaw. It's endemic to the island of Taiwan. It's listed as a protected species because of overhunting and habitat loss. They are prized for use in medical experiments and have been hunted by locals because the monkeys damage crops. Their numbers fell to an all-time low in the late 1980s, but the population has since rebounded thanks to stronger conservation efforts in Taiwan to protect this species. This is a Hawaiian honey creeper. It's a bird in Hawaii. It has a very unique bill, and it too is considered endemic to Hawaii. This is a picture of the ring-tailed lemur found in Madagascar. It's an endemic species there. There are actually 5 families of lemurs with 101 species and subspecies. The smallest lemur would actually fit in your hand, while the largest can be about 25 pounds. Many of these lemurs live in matriarchal societies where the females call the shots. Most species spend most of their time in the trees and travel through the forest canopy, climbing and leaping. They're very agile. As of 2014, 94% of the 101 species of lemurs were considered threatened, and some have fallen into extinction just within the past few hundred years. This is the Javan rhino. It used to be the most widespread Asian rhinoceros on the planet, but has been hunted to near extinction. The best estimates put the remaining numbers between 46 and 66 individual rhinos. The few Javan rhinos left in the wild live in 2 small separate national parks. None of them live in zoos. The animals are valued by poachers for their horns, which can fetch as much as $30,000 per kilogram on the black market. The future does not look good for this rhino. Those that aren't killed by poachers can look forward to an uncertain future as disease and health problems caused by inbreeding occur. There's such a few numbers of these species left. They don't do well in zoos in general, and the Javans have fared even worse. The last one in captivity died in the Australian Zoo in 1907, despite the efforts to try to help this species. This is a map that depicts the protected areas worldwide as of 2014. So these are regions where they're trying to protect the ecosystems in order to protect the species that thrive in those regions. We now deal with protection of species in a different way than we have historically in the past. In the past, we would just protect the species and say you can't hunt them, you can't trap them, you can't do anything that would cause harm to them. Now we look at their habitat that they rely upon, and we consider it a critical habitat if you have species that are declining in population being dependent upon that habitat, so we actually protect habitats as well. This is an example of a bird that they're not sure if it's extinct or not. The ivory-billed woodpecker is native to the southeastern United States in the wetlands and forests of that region. It was last sighted in the 1940s and was deemed extinct in the mid-1990s, mainly because of habitat loss, deforestation, and overhunting. In the early 2000s, Cornell Ornithology Lab scientists searched more than 500,000 acres over 8 states trying to find this bird. They had no confirmed sightings until 2005. In 2005, a single male ivory-billed woodpecker was sighted and was confirmed by the research team and the director of the Cornell Ornithology Lab. So, very interesting. There may be 1 or 2 of these individuals left, and it may not be extinct as was once thought. Researchers are still doing inventories on this bird to try to track down if there's any more population numbers than the one that was sighted in 2005.